Medical professionals of Reddit, what is the worst hookup-related injury you've seen at your workplace? Exotic special ordered venomous spider placed where the sun don't shine. Guy called an ambulance cause he wasn't sure if he could put bug bite cream up there. As the packaging said, for external use only. Lost entire traverse section of necrotic bowel. They lived, but they poop in a bag now. At first I thought, how crazy do you have to be to do that? But then I instantly thought, I'm gonna be sus of people that like spiders from now on. Mini lava lamp stuck in the rectum. Power cord was sticking out like a tail. Mini lava lamp stuck in a rectum? Sounds like a Card Against Humanity's card. Did you try unplugging it and then plugging it back in? Broken pee-pee. Dude's testes were the size of grapefruits. I assumed the internal artery was pumping blood into them from somewhere. Wasn't MA then, now in med school. It was a neat injury, but nothing we could do for him at the urgent care. He needed surgery for sure. Did see a bottle stuck up in a bum x-ray as well. I'm not one to judge. Keep on freaking on. But don't put glass up your bum, please. Anyone who's had the misfortune of watching One Man, One Jar in the mid-2000s knows better. Childhood memory unlocked. Countless cases of stuff stuck you know where. Pee-pee sticks, lady toys, cucumbers, toilet bowl brushes. If it's possible to get it in there, then someone's needed it surgically removed. Toilet bowl brush was the most shocking. However, the funniest was reconstructing a giant white, oddly realistic, veiny looking pee-pee on the back table to make sure they had pulled it all out. Pro tip, if you get something stuck up there, don't make up some fantastical story about unclothed light bulb changing. We know how it got there, you know how it got there, there's no shame in liking that stuff, just tell us your personal time went awry. It would be kind of funny if a doctor did believe those wild stories and then was like, man, I never thought that could happen. I used to work weekend night shifts. Had a young girl come in one weekend. Despite her age, she had a hip replacement and it was dislocated. ER put it back in and she went on her way. Next weekend, she's back again. Same thing. Third weekend in a row, and there she is. Finally, I ask what she's doing to dislocate her hip so much, and she says her boyfriend keeps bending her leg back too far while they hook up. I told her to try different positions. Talk about not caring about your partner's well-being. Dude stuck a pencil up his urethra. What is porous? It got stuck. For a day. He couldn't pee around it, and initially, that's what his complaint was, urinary retention. Finally, in the exam room, when the doc asked him what the freak, with the eraser sticking out of his pee-pee, the guy finally fessed up. He ended up needing surgery. He was also like 70 years old. Old enough to know better. Damn, in his 70s and still being a freak? You go, Grandpa. Uncle-in-law, who's an anesthesiologist, had a patient come in that had poured concrete in his bum while trying to make a custom pee-pee stick. They had to chisel the concrete out of his bum. Excuse me, he did what now? Back in medical school, I was on a surgery rotation with a classmate. Our first day, we got split into groups. By chance, my first case was an appendectomy. His first case was helping deliver a jewel-encrusted pee-pee stick from the bum of a 250-pound guy. He was at the business end when it crowned and was responsible for catching as the surgeon pushed from above. Gives a new meaning to the terms pitch and catch. Worked at a physical therapy clinic for years. 78-year-old man came in with a herniated disc in his neck after satisfying his girlfriend. He was a longtime patient and friend of the therapist, so we got the whole story. Our patient, P, was old, rich, and single, and loved all the sleazy bits that came with it. One day, his 39-year-old girlfriend asked him to return the favor, so P goes to town for the first time ever at age 78. Not really knowing what he was doing, he went at her like a dog drinking water, his words. A few moments later, he felt a pop and his arm went numb. He came to us with a nearly useless left arm about 2 days later. My boss was laughing so hard during the eval that I went into the treatment room to check on him. P insisted I stay and hear the whole story. P died a couple months later from something unrelated. I miss that crusty old bastard a lot. Wait a minute, for the first time at 78, Mr. P? Come on now, don't be selfish like Mr. P, everyone. Also, he died a few months later. Anybody else kind of thinking it's a little suspicious? A janitor heated up petroleum jelly and injected it into his pee-pee with a syringe. He was trying to make it bigger. He kept adding more. Another janitor saw him and decided to do the same. So it turns out with nowhere to go, Petroleum jelly forms granulomas under the skin, which gets infected. Word was the tip of his thing and the base wouldn't work anymore, only the middle, and abscesses formed, resulting in what was described as the pee-pee looking like, and you might want to brace yourself for this, maggots had burrowed tunnels through it. Janitor 1 was hospitalized for several weeks. As for Janitor 2, he ended up with several ulcerating wounds in his pelvic region. You could stick a finger in them. They were that big. Apparently injecting your thing with petroleum jelly is fairly common. Some girls have also attempted to inject this in their chesticles to give themselves implants. It has led to deaths because bits and pieces of it can dislodge and travel to your lungs. First off, ew. Secondly, I think it's important to say that many people in the world are not happy with their bodies, so I would suggest therapy to get help with that issue. And after that, if you still want to improve your body, at least seek out a medical professional. Typically not a medical professional, but I have a friend who was a hospital pharmacist. He said a patient came in with a coffee thermos in his bum, cap first. He got the rest of the thermos out, but the cap stayed. After a couple of days, he finally decided to go to the hospital because he couldn't get it out. The cap ended up festering bacteria, and he had to have part of his colon removed. Now the guy is in his 30s with a colostomy bag. I've seen a crystal clear imprint of a clothing iron to the bum. The thought process was something like, if candle wax equals kinky, iron equals mega kinky? I don't know. Also, a pair of junkies got wasted and shot a substance in one of the guy's members, and we had to fillet the whole thing. He was distraught about the size difference after. This is why you shouldn't do substances, kids. Makes your member smaller. I had a patient come into the ER with runs of VTAC, dangerous arrhythmia, because his boyfriend sprinkled substance powder on a pee-pee stick and used it on him. It's very absorbent up there, and suddenly your heart is crapping out at the rate of 220 beats per second. Kinda hookup related? On Andrews Air Force Base in the 1980s, a guy was caught doing bad things to a family member. As the cops arrived, he sat on the front concrete steps and hammered his junk off. My mom worked on him in the emergency room. He still ended up in jail. Well, at least he gave himself more justice than the court system would. 18-year-old kid had a cheap pee-pee stick break way up in his bum, was bleeding and needed surgery. In my state, you're not legally an adult until 19, so he had to call his mom for consent, and she demanded staying with him through his entire ER visit. If you want the details, it was probably 7 to 9 inches of plastic. Top 2 inches are what broke off. Also, yes, the medical consent rules are screwy. Applies to SA as well, unless the parent was the suspected assailant. Not my story, but my mom's. She used to work in the oncology department at her hospital a while back. One day she came home, sits me down and says, syphilis in the eye. You always make sure your partner is clean. Don't take their word for it. I don't care what you do, just syphilis in the eye. That's all I needed to hear. Labia hematoma. Couple had hookup time, then got into a fight. He kicked her in the crotch. This bursted a blood vessel in the labia, which made it swell to the size of a large pear. That crap hurts. She used many colorful words to describe what she thought of him. My friend works at an ER in a small rural area in Canada. Apparently this young guy comes in and has a can of Axe body spray stuck up his rectum. He was extremely embarrassed and his excuse was that he accidentally sat on it. The crazy thing about this story is that I bet if the dude farted, you probably wouldn't be able to tell if it was him or the Axe body spray. A guy came into the emergency department because his bum hurt after his boyfriend, how do you say, put his whole hand up there? He had torn his bowel and had to get a colostomy. It wasn't life-ending or anything, but imagine going to the ED after hooking up and getting told that you're getting a freaking colostomy. I had a woman in her 50s that had her boyfriend do the same thing, while they had recreationally taken muscle relaxers. She apparently was really into it and wanted him to be rougher with her. Then he pulled his arm out and noticed that there was blood everywhere. He called for an ambulance and she had a significant bowel tear. She had surgery and also got a colostomy, and several complications post-op and ended up on a ventilator long-term, unable to wean. Her grown children didn't know what caused it. The boyfriend was very attentive and stayed by her side. He was very nice and I know he had to be dealing with some guilt. Eventually, her prognosis was so poor that they withdrew life support and she died. Every time I had conversations with her boyfriend, I noticed how huge his fists and forearms were. My dark sense of humor is telling me to make a joke, but in all seriousness, people do need to be more careful with what they take/use during hookup time. Nothing worse than pee-pee sticks, lady toys, and other objects stuck where the sun don't shine. One chap did say that he likes sticking things up there, and that's fair enough, but the strange excuses are usually the most entertaining part of it. Worst genital injury was some guy who drilled his junk with the cordless drill doing DIY. Don't secure your workpiece between your knees if you want to be sure to keep both testicles, gentlemen. I was actually reading an article about kink-friendly medicine today, and how much of a shame it is that there's so much stigma. All the kinksters agree that they should be open with their doctors, but most are not, and many will use urgent cares instead of their primary care due to reporting issues of judging by their practitioners. It causes real health issues. I'm still embarrassed about having to explain to my insurance that I both ran my car off an icy road and also got flogged so hard I had to stop because my spine hurt in the same week. So I couldn't really tell which one caused my back injury. They wanted to send it to my car insurance company. Oh, and they called during work hours, of course. I would have busted out laughing if I heard my coworker telling their insurance that they got their back blown out and needed to file a claim. Infected penile implant. His member looked like a purple tall boy beer can. They had to take him to the OR, literally filleted his man parts, take out the implant, and wash it all out. Worst part is they left him open for several days. Ick. I've actually read that men that get penile implants, it's not guaranteed that your junk works after. I think I'd rather have my stuff work than it looking better. But hey, to each their own. My mother worked in the ER and told me a story about a guy who was wasted on fairy dust and couldn't get it up. His friend told him to stick a chicken bone in his pee-pee and he would be able to hook up. He shoved the chicken bone in knuckle first and it shredded the tip of his pee-pee. A coworker was getting divorced. One night, his soon-to-be ex called about something and she could tell he was having a bad day. So to cheer him up, she had told him about how while she and her new boyfriend were hooking up, he shoved a pee-pee stick up her bum and it got stuck. After failed attempts to remove it, they went to the ER and she had to get surgery. After surgery, doctor sanitized it and gave it back to her. And in case you want to know, the story didn't make him feel better. How can any sane person think telling your ex about your new partner and you hooking up would ever be a good story to tell them? Does it count if I saw it prior to the doctor? Did some AV work for a friend of mine that managed a swing club. He was hooking up with some girl on this sort of rolling gurney / bed out in the middle of the lounge area, with like 50 plus people enjoying the show. They accidentally slid off the bed and in the jumble and ensuing thump to the ground, an audible pop was heard. He fractured his member. That pop that was heard was the poor guy's junk. Almost immediately it looked like a deflated purple balloon. This was many years ago now, and you can rest assured that I never let old broken pee-pee forget. Hey, what are best friends for, right? My family is constantly in and out of the local ER. Last time I went there for a concussion, there was a man in there with his wife for heart palpitations during hookup time. He started having a slow heart attack while they were doing the deed, and they ended up admitting him. There was also a girl in there, wasted out of her mind, claiming she hooked up with multiple different guys, like 3 or 6, and had gotten pregnant from all of them. But then her friends had kidnapped her and had given her a particular brownie with stuff in it, but she didn't know what kind of stuff. And the brownie made her lose her baby, and now she was dying. According to the conversation the doctor kept having with her, she had come in 3 times in that month claiming she was pregnant and worried about her baby. Each time they tested and all the tests came back negative. She started her period and it caused her to insist that she had lost the multiple men's baby. And it was the fault of the brownie she had in San Diego 3 days ago. She started wailing when they gave her some meds to calm her down, claiming that they were killing her baby with injections, and that she would call up her friends who kidnapped her and force her to eat the deadly brownie as proof. I'm not sure what ended up happening to her and her apparent psychotic break, but I'm hoping that they got her some help because she was clearly out of it. Dentist here. In dental school, definitely saw a girl with an inflamed palate that was worried about an infection. Did some tests, nothing looked infectious. Faculty member pulls me aside and was like, yeah, that's a bruise from a certain type of action if you catch my drift. Might not be a major injury, but definitely memorable. We actually learned / saw this in oral pathology class. It can happen because of continuous trauma to the palate. Just like you get a bruise on your arm with continuous hits, even if they aren't too hard. I'd recommend swishing with a saltwater rinse a couple times a day for a few days to help with the swelling, and maybe take a break until it heals. I'm sure AV stars know all the best health tips for these types of injuries. Dissected vertebral artery from a mouth hookup. Essentially a big brain hemorrhage. Did not end well either. My mom is a secretary at a hospital, so she had heard a few stories. Apparently a person had come in with a carrot stuck up their bum. Says it got stuck up there because he fell on it while they were cooking without clothes. I'd like to take this moment to thank everyone in this thread for making sure my genitalia never works again. Was working an ER rotation at a major DC hospital while getting my EMT. I wasn't around at the onset, but a gentleman came in complaining of swelling down there, and a nurse gave him a cursory look. She immediately took him into a private room, closed the door, and came over to tell us what was going on. The guy apparently liked to feel weight on his junk when he had personal time. He had put his junk through the center of a 5-pound weight plate, like you would when you do free weights. He did his business and then fell asleep. 5 hours later, he woke up swollen and unable to pull himself out of the weight. So he had somehow taken public transportation, or walked, with the 5-pound weight plate in his pants all the way to the hospital. We spent the next 30 minutes trying to reduce the swelling by putting crushed ice up against him without success. Finally, the charge nurse just called the DC Fire and EMS to get assistance with the heavy rescue squad to cut through the plate. We took the guy into the psych room, closed the door, and proceeded to cut it off. It being the weight, not his manhood. The entire time having to keep applying more ice to the plate so that it wouldn't become hot enough to cauterize his groin. The other patients really didn't appreciate hearing a buzzsaw, screaming, and seeing all of the ER staff giggling. Of course, the poor guy also had to deal with the constant stream of doctors, nurses, and techs having to go in there to check on something and see what was going on. I think this guy misunderstood how to get swole. My stepdad is an ER doctor in the only hospital in the city I was raised in. There was no place else to go when the hookup swing my idiot boyfriend hung on the drywall ceiling came crashing down and broke my tailbone. He was also there 6 months later when the same idiot boyfriend let go of my hips as I was visiting this town called Pound and was sent over the edge of a bed and headfirst into a desk. Sorry, Dad. Either this couple is really clumsy or they have an injury kink. We get inmates at my hospital because they're right down the road. They like to inflict injuries upon themselves to get out and spend a day here. The best from the inmates was a guy stuck a razor blade up his urethra, then proceeded to shove it up further with the pen. The pen put a hole in his urethra, and of course the razor shredded it. I think I'm gonna throw up after hearing that story. So I have a patient who came in due to a rash on his pee-pee. When asking about what caused the rash, he states, "I had a really rough hookup." Like really rough. I just nod my head and inform the doctor. We both give each other a what the freak look, and she proceeds to speak with the patient. The patient told her the true reason why he has the rash, and it was because he dry humped his girlfriend so roughly that he basically gave himself carpet burn on his pee-pee from his pants. No one ever talks about the dangers of the dry hump. Had this poor girl come into the ER a few weeks ago. Simple hookup went wrong case, and she was basically bleeding from her hoo-ha. They think she had some weak arteries down there and one must have just ruptured. Full disclosure, this happened to me. I noticed a small amount of bleeding immediately after. Later I noticed more, about the amount of menstruation. I laid a towel down and decided to go to bed. I felt a rush of fluid and made it to the bathroom before feeling faint and hitting the floor. I was able to call an ambulance from the floor. In the ambulance they said my face lips were blue from the loss of blood. One quick emergency surgery later and I was all stitched up and on my way home. Apparently I have weak arteries, which started as a small tear, broke open. So way back in medical school, all of us had to do 2 months rotation in OBGYN. This rotation was split up into a few weeks of labor ward, a couple weeks of gynecologic surgery, and a couple weeks of OBGYN ER. Our major county hospital had a small, separate ER just for pregnant women and those with purely gynecological complaints, to relieve some pressure off the medical and surgical ERs. So I'm sitting in the OBGYN ER with the residents one night, and about 2 a.m. we get an ambulance crew bringing in a youngish woman who is absolutely howling in pain, and tell me to get a quick report from the EMTs, who had already talked to both the woman and her boyfriend, who they said would not be coming to the ER because he was busy talking to the police. Per the EMTs, the woman and her boyfriend had just been at her house hooking up. They had just finished their business and, as folks are meant to do, decided to light up a certain type of pipe and share it while they were unclothed on their couch. The boyfriend apparently went out to their car to grab grab something and inadvertently bumped the headlight switch. This caused the lights to flash, which the woman apparently interpreted as "the cops are coming" for some reason, and shoved the lit pipe into her hoo-ha. Obviously, this was excruciatingly painful, causing her to tense up and start frailing trying to get it out, which then caused parts of it to shatter, so now she had hot broken glass in her baby maker. I don't have a hoo-ha personally, but that story made my imaginary hoo-ha hurt. I'm a firefighter slash paramedic. Broken peepee, bent at a right angle about halfway. It's the second time he had it. His wife was on top and got carried away. It looked like they sacrificed a chicken on the bed. Not my call, but a paramedic was called to a 20-something male living in a ski resort town having groin pains. Arrived to find his pee-pee completely necrotic. His buddies had bet him that he couldn't stick it in a snowman for an hour. Perfect example of winning the battle, but losing the war. 26-year-old decided to be circumcised. His doctor told him not to hook up. He didn't listen. It peeled like a banana. Yep, that does it. I've had enough internet for the day after reading this. That's it for this video. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. It's linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching and we'll see you guys next time.